How's it going, everybody? Saturday here at the house. Thought I was going to sleep in. That didn't happen. So Ethan and I are out here getting ready to put that back in the Durango. We got it pulled back over here. Now we got to push it from there to the garage and get started on it. And hopefully everything goes as planned.
Smoothly.
So let's get started. And getting ready to prep this thing to go back in. Once again, I've got the plate back on here. Use my little silicone trick to hold it in place so it doesn't come off while we're trying to stab the motor back in. Also too, guys, clean all this out before it goes back in, because a lot of times that converter sits in there for a while, gets a little bit of rust, a little bit of pitting going on, but just kind of clean it all up. That way it's just easier to slide back in. Ethan just got finished cleaning the front of the converter off. Yeah, that way there you're not, because this thing's a handful enough, try to get in and line up right, but any opportunity you have, any advantage you have to make it going a little easier, take it. Well, we're inching the engine in a little at a time. Right now, Ethan's getting the AC compressor kind of halfway mounted back up because there's not a whole lot of room here. So he's going to get it up on its stud, get a nut on it, that way we can bring the engine the rest of the way down. Well, it's Sunday. We're back on the Durango. Couple little setbacks yesterday, nothing too bad, but we got it done. These engines fit tight in here. So it was almost like working on this truck a few years ago, because the way the firewall and everything comes up, it really sits in the back. And with the engine hoist, I'm right up against the front bumper cover all the way in, so we were still trying to get that extra 1.5 inch push to get to the transmission. It just wasn't happening with the setup we had on the engine to begin with. It was fine pulling it out, but getting it back in. So we ended up taking the piece off of the engine hoist that we were using to kind of lift and angle the motor and stuff like that, and just went back to a traditional chain, so we could just clear everything underneath the tongue. After pulling it out, rechaining it, and dropping it back down again, we finally got it in, and so thank God for that, but it ate up a little bit of time yesterday, but we're not really on a time crunch. So now it's set in place, it's on the mounts, it's mated to the transmission, torque converter bolts are in, that's all tied in now. I just got done with the power steering pump and the AC compressor again, got all that remounted. Getting ready to do the alternator. Ethan is underneath, putting the rest of the bolts in under for the starter. The rest of the bell housing bolts on the bottom. There's a plate that actually joins the engine to the transmission. That's got to get bolted up. That's like 8 bolts on that. But there's not a lot of room for this starter. Let's see if I get my camera up in there. So you see the back of it. And basically, to get it down, you got to drop the drive shaft and some other things, and to get it back in is just really tight. So he's getting that done now. As soon as we get the bottom buttoned up, then we'll let the vehicle back down on the ground and get everything on top. So I'm hoping here in a few hours we will be firing this thing up. So when we're tearing everything apart and just trying to drop the exhaust, they got these little things on the manifold, and the bolt goes through, and these things like to spin after they've been up there for a while. And we got lucky, we got 3 of the 4 without spinning. The 4th one spun, and of course it was on the driver's side top, and it was a pain in the butt. So new hardware, new exhaust bolts. But you get that far into it and you got an issue with one of these, just go ahead and get the new ones. it'll make life easier putting it back in. So that's what we did on that. Hopefully here in a few hours, we'll have this thing fired up. I still got to clean the intake, put intake gaskets on it. But yesterday was just a long day. You have that sometimes. Sometimes things work really well. Everything sets in like it's supposed to. Other times you don't, you struggle with it. And which is what we did a little bit yesterday. So that ate up a couple hours of our time. But, you know, at the end of the day, I mean, just take your time with it. You know, don't rush, because if you rush, things happen. And you don't want to break anything. So we just put it back a little bit. Kind of redid the chains, got her back in. She slid in, bolted in with no problem after that. And we'll just get back to it and see how she goes.
Alrighty guys, so we had this piece of the harness tucked off behind the transmission dipstick and zip tied up to here whenever we were putting the motor back in, just to make that squeeze easier. I cut that, got it wrapped back around. We also had this all the way pulled up from the underneath just so nothing would get damaged on it. I ran it back down there, so now I'm about to get back down and plug in knock sensors and stuff like that. Alrighty, so now that we're down here, here's the end of the harness that I said I dropped down from the top. We got knock sensor here. Let me get you on that. And then we have the crank sensor right here, just over the lip of the block. And we're just gonna get those plugged in and carry on. Just like that. And just in case anybody watching this is working on a 2011-ish all-wheel drive 5.7 Durango, there's this ground strap right here that mounts to, or kind of just clicks in to the engine mount. It runs back up towards the front of the car and mounts on to the body. There's a little nut off to the side up here. So just a weird little thing about this chassis specifically. Next up is this plate that we were telling you about. It's just kind of a, well, don't roll away on them. It's just kind of a brace in between the engine and transmission. Some extra support. You can get it up in there. There we go. But it'll sit in like that. And it's just a little support, I guess. More strength, more rigidity. Alrighty guys, so I got this plate in finally. And this, just like with most things, you want to go ahead and get all of your bolts started first before tightening any of them down, just to make sure that everything's gonna line up and they're all gonna sit in there right. But just got to tighten this down and then get the exhaust connected again. See our new hardware up there. Yeah, just keeping on.
All right, we got her back on the ground. We're just finishing some things on top before we get the intake on. Ethan just got finished putting the other heater hose line in from the water pump back. So he's doing that now. I'm getting ready to put the coil packs in. And we'll be almost ready to put the intake on it and put some fluids in it. All right, we got everything buttoned up on top. Time to put the intake on. I just got finished putting the new O-rings on it. So she's ready to go. But anytime you're doing that, man, always replace these things, because after a while, they're just nothing left of them. So let's get the intake on, get it snugged down, get everything plugged in. We're going to leave the injectors unplugged right now because we're going to get the oil in, let it circulate a few times, let it build up some oil pressure, and then we'll turn around and hook the injectors back up and see if she's going to fire. Well, we got the oil down in her. We're plugging everything in, and we noticed on the temp sensor that there was a broken wire, but it was right there at the plug-in. So there wasn't gonna be really no way to fix it. Luckily, we had the donor car out back, which is a 2010, and had the same connector on it. So now we're putting another connector on it. And I don't know, it looked like it was already broke or getting ready to break. Kind of makes me wonder if the fan was kicking in or not. So, don't know, but we're fixing it and we'll go from there. Well, we spent the past couple days working on this. Just kind of taking our time with it. The customer, let's do the backstory on this if you haven't watched the other videos. He asked if we would pull the engine out for him, and he was going to do what he wanted to do, which basically was put stage 2 cam and Texas speed in it, new valve springs, new push rods, and because originally it came in and a lifter failure. So we pulled the engine out for him, dropped it off. He put it together, brought it back to us. So we spent the past couple of days putting everything back in. Just got the oil put in it, and I was getting ready to fill up the radiator, and we saw there was a little leak going on with the radiator. We took care of that, and we went to top it off again, and all of a sudden water was coming from the passenger side of the engine. And the guy happened to be over here, so he got to witness all this. And coolant and water started coming up between the block and the head. Now, mind you, I usually don't like pulling an engine out if somebody else is going to work on it. But in this case, you know, all right, no problem. He's a diesel mechanic. Surely, you know. So I think what has happened is he put the head gaskets on the wrong side of the motor. And if you do that with one of these, the galleys don't line up on the head with the water jackets and everything. If they don't line up right, they start leaking outward. And which has happened with this one, which really sucks because we were like 5 minutes away of turning this thing over and firing it up. So kind of disappointing, you know, seeing we busted our butt on this thing basically because it's a tight fit, especially underneath. There's a bunch of stuff you have to take off. That's why it's like 13.7 hours on this. And a little knuckle busting, trying to get things fit back into place, and not be able to turn the engine over. So we've done our part. We pulled it out, we put it back in for him. This is going back over to his house so he can pull the heads back off. And he believes that he did put them on backwards after I showed him the left side, right side. And for some reason, he thought the passenger side was the left side and the driver's side was the right side, which is not the case on this. And so you win some, you lose some. Didn't think this video was going to turn a 180 on us, but it did. That's why personally, if I'm doing an engine job pulling it out, I'd rather do it myself. And so that way I know, and when it goes back in and there's something wrong, it's on me, him, us. But in this case, it's the customer. And now he gets to tear it all back apart. So just take your time, guys. Make sure it's done right. Double, triple check before you button stuff up. I just don't know where to go after this.
Guess get back onto our own personal stuff at this point.
So this will be gone tomorrow, and we'll be getting back on the lark. So we need to get the engine pulled out, the donor car, the engine transmission, We need to get the trans panels cut out of it and whatever else we're going to need. So we're basically going to be focusing on this now. So we can get to the point where I've got to rebuild the engine that's going to be going into this thing. And so that's where our time's going to be spent now. But other than that, guys, I don't know. Just really bums me out now.
Yep. Would have been nice to hear the Texas Speed Cam and all of that.
Yep. Other than that, guys, you have a good one, a safe one, and we'll see you down the road.